Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I'm working on a DIY cage upgrade, but this one has a little twist. So I'm at Home Depot right now. The measurements of the cage are going to be 3 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot. And the twist is this cage actually isn't for Strudel. I've been getting ready to bring another hamster home soon, so today we're going to work on that cage for him. But I was also simultaneously working on a cage for Strudel. Strudel's cage will be 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot. In looking back, I probably would have made another 4 by 2 by 2, but this cage is still going to be plenty big. I took a much needed Chipotle break and then we started spray painting. Finding paint that is completely agreed upon to be pet safe is somewhat difficult. So with some of these types of paint, you have to wait 2 weeks for the fumes to fully dissipate in order for it to be safe. That is just specifically the paint that I'm using here. We ran out of this one pretty fast anyways and ended up having to pick up another paint. This paint also needed a 2-week drying period. Halfway through, we found a non-toxic pet-safe paint. They are a lot more expensive, but we definitely started using that instead, and we'll use that on the second cage completely. Shout out to my dad who helped me build both the cages. This video is just about the first cage, but I will have a second video building the second cage. You would definitely be able to build the cage yourself, but it's a lot more helpful to have another person there. Getting into the actual building the cage structure, we measured out where we were going to drill holes and put the screws in to connect the base and the side piece. So this is drilling the holes, and then we added screws in. The clamps at the bottom are to help keep the wood in place when we were attaching the pieces together. It's important to have 90-degree angles on all these corners because as it is a box, we need the base and the top to fit perfectly. Having little cracks like the one on the bottom is totally okay because the next step is using 100% silicone to line the cracks. This helps hold the cage together and it prevents dirt from exiting the cage through the cracks. The wood itself is pretty heavy. It's 1/2 inch birch plywood, so the extra support is a good thing. Now I went in with another layer of paint because I still needed to paint the whole back. My boyfriend was helping me paint this one. Here we had to wait another 2 weeks for the paint to fully air out. So then it was time for the front panel. Our first acrylic plexiglass actually broke when cutting it down to size, so we ended up ordering another one that was a 3 by 2 exactly. We drilled holes through the plexiglass at first and then screwed in the screws. The plexiglass had a paper covering on here, so once we take that off, it'll look a lot more like actual glass. Then we siliconed the front panel to the rest of the cage, just as we did with the other parts. After the silicone dried, we moved on to epoxying the bottom. So our first epoxy was actually a fail, unfortunately. This was the first time we did it, but we did it outdoors in my garage and the temperature and humidity was too high for it to fully harden. So unfortunately, we did end up having to scrape this off. And then once we got most of it off, or as much as we could, we did it with a different brand this time in my basement, so it was a lot cooler in there, and this one worked, thankfully. I love the process of pouring it and when it spreads all out. I think it looks so aesthetic. There was some yellow stain left on the bottom from the previous epoxy, but it's not the end of the world. And then our last mistake was trying to seal the outside, which somehow started turning the paint colors. So I had to paint over this little section again, and we ended up just leaving the outside not sealed. But now some good news, the pet paint came in, and this paint I super recommend. It was awesome. I painted the rest of the inside layers of this cage so that it's safe for them to be up against and is sealing in the previous paint that I used. So here I moved on to the lid of the cage. I used 1/2 inch 4x4 poplar wood pieces, and we sawed them down / got a few cut at Home Depot, but they have rules about how much they can and cannot cut, so we had to do a little part ourselves. We're making the outside of the frame over here, and this is some chicken coop wire to line the top. I made sure that the holes were really small because I am planning on bringing home a Roborowski, which is the smallest of the domesticated species. They're actually less than an inch when they are young and grow to be about 1.5 to 2 inches when they're adults. I hammered in a few staples that weren't completely flat, and then we put on these little steel plates that reinforced the structure and helped keep the chicken coop wire on the wood. To match the rest of the cage, I sponge painted the wire white as well on both sides, just to make it look more aesthetic, cohesive, whatever you want to call it. And after a few touch-ups on the lid, just because I'm a perfectionist, it was time to attach the lid to the base of the cage with hinges. We used different screws for the top and the bottom holes because the bottom panel is 1/2 inch thick, whereas the top we have almost 2.5 inches. So we could not have screws or a drill hole that was longer than 1/2 inch to prevent it from sticking into the hamster cage. And then to fix the small gap in the front where the panel wasn't fully touching the wood, just to be extra safe, we got another piece of wood and glued it onto the front of it. The piece of wood was 7/8 of an inch, I believe, and this paintbrush was so small, it was so cute, and I painted the front of the wood so that it would match the rest of the cage. And wow, that last paint stroke felt great. I was so excited to be done. We screwed on a handle, and this was the final cage. I was pretty happy with how it turned out. Obviously the little yellow stain at the bottom isn't ideal, but otherwise I think we did a really good job. I learned from a bunch of the mistakes that we made, and it was a lot easier to make the second cage, which we started doing about 1/3 of the way into this cage. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for new hamster updates and Strudel's cage.